Okay, great. So now that we've handled that, the tricky part of this was just setting things up. We're going to examine the general structure of our API, starting from the files in the repository root. First and foremost, we have our application entry point, which is the server.js file here, which is where we instantiate our Express application, pull in any of the npm packages or errors or routes or whatever we have here, and along with any config variables, like the port. Then we set up our application's flow. Well, first of all, we initialize a new Express application, and then we add a bunch of middleware, which is the cores middleware, the express.json middleware, which parses the request body, and the Morgan middleware, which does logging for us. Then we set some routes, the auth routes, and some generic error handlers for 404 and anything else that passes through and doesn't match any of the routes we have in our application. And then we tell our application to listen for the port. Now, we'll be talking a lot more about this general flow and also kind of what middleware is, since we've never really gone deep into that. And it's also a pretty important concept in Express. We've kind of just done a hand-wavy, middleware just works, don't worry about it type thing, but we'll actually get to a real explanation to process what's happening in this application, but we'll save that for a later video. For now, let's take a look at the config file. So in this config file, there's some stuff we need to change here too. This is not auth starter test. This is rate my setup test, and this is just rate my setup. And since that all came with the auth starter package, or the repo, that makes a lot of sense. Rate my setup. This is just something we can do at the very beginning when we clone a repo, is just configure it to work the way we want it to and to look the way we want it to. A few things here. We have an isTesting variable in case we start to do some tests. That'll just determine what the node environment is. If it's testing, we know that, great, we'll use the testing database. If not, we'll use the standard database. We also grab a port and the bcrypt work factor to manage password hashing. Then we export all this goodness and for use throughout the rest of our application. So there's not too much going on here, but the important thing is we have our database URI set up, which is used, let's save this, in our db.js file. Now, this file is pretty standard. All that's happening here is we create a node Postgres client, connect to the DB, and log a message to the screen depending on how that connection went. The only places DB client is being used at the moment is in our user model. So let's look there next, actually. And we can see here we import that DB, and then we have a few interesting methods here. 5 methods, 4 of which are actually querying the Postgres database. This make public user is just to ensure that we don't accidentally pass the password to the client, the password of any user to the client. But these other 4 methods are all hitting Postgres, and so they're actually using the database, which is perfect. We call the register method, where's that? Right here. So we call this register method when a user's signing up, ensuring that both their email and username are unique before going through with registration. And so we covered a lot of this in the last one, but just going over it again. The login method is pretty similar. We check for some required fields, email, password. We make sure that the user exists in our database, and then we compare their password, their hashed password, to the submitted password using bcrypt, and if those match, we return a public user. So just some standard stuff here. The user model is only really needed for use in the auth routes, so let's look at that. And there's nothing crazy here. We have 2 routes, one for logging a user in at the /login route, and one for registering a user at the /register route. And both of these routes use a try-catch block to ensure that if any errors happen, we just pass those errors along with the next middleware. We'll be talking a lot more about the next middleware as well as this progresses. Now, any custom errors that we throw are found in the utils errors.js file, and we have our bad request error, unauthorized error, forbidden error, not found error, just some errors that might occur as users are using our application, and we export all of them here for use throughout the rest of our app. That's pretty much it. That's as quick an overview as we can do of everything that lives in our project currently. Now that whole repo we just explored it's really all that's needed to power the beginnings of our API. So let's actually test it out with an HTTP client just to make sure things are working as expected. All we'll do is we'll run npm start here. And if things work, cool. We have our setup. Everything's logged to the screen. The colors are pretty. Nodemon is restarting on whenever we save something. So if I do this, Nodemon restarts the server. Fantastic. And let's just use an HTTP client to make sure that things are working like we want it to. So we'll come here, we will create a new request. And let's say, let's call this rate my setup. And it'll be a post request, create. We'll make a JSON body to HTTP local host 3001 /auth /register. And we will send the email, something silly, me.u.them, me@u.them, or whatever. Username is me, and password is PW, because I don't feel like typing it out. Great. Now, if we send this, hopefully it'll work. Great. We got a user back, we signed them up, and if we check here, we see that that post request was logged to the terminal. So we get back a valid user object, the password isn't there, it's exactly what we want. Let's try to log in with an invalid password. Okay, invalid username password, that's good. Now if we use the correct one, and it works perfectly. That's exactly what we want, right? Now, ordinarily, we'd probably write a testing suite for this behavior so we can be confident that our API is working as expected every time we make any code changes. And while that would be best practice, we're going to save that kind of work for a future series, as we have a lot of things to get to for the time being in this one. What we do seem to know is that our API is working, and it looks like, it looked like it's working, at least. And we can confirm that by entering pSQL here, and checking to make sure that that data is saved in the database. Let's connect to rate my setup, and select all from users. Cool, so the user was signed up, has a password, username, is admin, all that greatness, looks good. So that's pretty much all we need. We know that our application is working like we want it to. Things seem to feel all right. We're logging things correctly. We have the appropriate errors. So it's time to actually build our new application. And to do that, we're going to actually have to change a couple things. We'll probably have to change the users table a little bit, depending, maybe we won't. And then we're going to need to create two new tables. One to store all the posts of users posting their setup to our application, and then one table to store all the ratings for users who are evaluating other users' coding setups. So with that in mind, let's get going. We don't need to save anything, so we didn't make any changes. I think we're just ready to go.